Welcome to another episode of Think Like a Pancreas, the podcast. I am Jennifer Smith. I am a registered dietitian and certified diabetes care and education specialist with Integrated Diabetes Services. And I am excited to welcome Gary Scheiner, founder and author of Think Like a Pancreas, the book. And today we have our next chapter to talk all about, which is essentially all about basal insulin dosing. And hopefully you've listened to our previous chapters already, so you're kind of moving through and learning along with our discussion. So what can you tell us more about basal insulin and how to dose it appropriately and what we should expect to follow and look at?
Welcome to Think Like a Pancreas, the podcast, where our goal is to keep you informed, inspired, and a little entertained on all things diabetes. The information contained in this program is based on the experience and opinions of the Integrated Diabetes Services clinical team. Please discuss any changes to your treatment plan with your personal healthcare provider before implementing.
I always think of basal insulin as the Rodney Dangerfield of insulins. It don't get no respect. Everyone's always concentrating on the meal doses and the corrections and making the insulin faster and faster. And
it's the one that we fiddle with more, right?
Yeah, all the focus, all the attention goes to the bolus insulin. And basal's just that little kid in the background, just biding his time. But basal insulin is the foundation that the whole program is built on. If you don't have basal insulin, you'll probably die in short order in ketoacidosis. You'll never manage your blood sugar. And if you don't get the doses right, it makes it really difficult just to fine tune anything else.
Right.
So that's why I dedicate a whole chapter of Think Like a Pancreas, the book, to basal insulin. It deserves attention, and it's an important consideration.
And there are different ways of evaluating the dose for it, whether you're using MDI or you're using an insulin pump. And today's pumps are certainly much different in even considering those basal dose adjustments, because we have adaptable pumps. We've got adjustments that we can make, where years ago, the conventional pumps were a little bit more of a solid strategy of establishing, the doses, right?
Exactly. Again, bolus is like the cheerleader quarterback of the football team. Basal is the water boy or the coach on the sidelines no one really cares about. But hey, things don't run without it. And basal insulin's job is really to offset the amount of glucose the body is producing on its own. Besides the food we eat, our blood sugar will rise as a result of our body's own production and secretion of glucose. The liver is largely responsible for that, although the muscles can do it to an extent also. But the liver is producing glucose throughout the day and night. Sometimes the liver makes extra insulin, especially when we're under stress. But even through a typical day where there's not much stress taking place, the liver is affected by different hormones that the body makes. Early in the morning, when the body is making a hormone called cortisol, it's part of the dawn phenomenon, the liver tends to put out extra glucose. Late in the day, in children during growth years, the body's making a lot of growth hormone. The liver puts out extra glucose during that time. So basal insulin needs are not flat around the clock. They vary by time of day, at least in people with type 1. People with type 2 can get by usually with a pretty flat basal rate. But if you have type 1, or if you're a type 2 and make very little of your own insulin anymore, the basal insulin needs tend to vary based on the phase of the day.
Nice. And how would you figure out, what would your starting approach be to establishing your correct dose of basal insulin then? Where would you start?
There are different formulas for figuring out the dose, and those are detailed in the book. But most people who are tuning into this are probably on insulin and are wondering, well, am I on the right dose of this insulin? For most people, the basal insulin accounts for about 40 to 50% of the daily insulin needs. It'll be a little bit higher in people on low-carb diets because they're just not bolusing as much. It'll be lower in people on high-carb diets and also in the elderly. So as we get older, our hormone production drops and the liver's glucose production isn't as high as it once was. But everyone's basal needs are unique to them. I don't like to categorize anybody based on, age or gender or anything like that. So that you do have to look at everybody individually. And the
Mm-hmm.
way we evaluate basal insulin is by what the blood sugar does when we're in a fasting state. And that goes for people on injections as well as those on pumps. If you haven't eaten or taken any rapid acting insulin for several hours, the basal should keep your blood sugar nice and steady. It shouldn't be rising or falling. If it is rising or falling, then the basal dose is incorrect. So for
Mm-hmm.
those who are on injection therapy, whether you're taking Lantus or Toujeo or Tresiba, any of the long-acting insulin formulations, we try to set the dose so that the glucose holds steady through the night. So if somebody has dinner at, say, 7 o'clock, we figure by 11 p.m., their rapid-acting insulin has pretty much cleared. So all they're getting from 11 o'clock on is basal insulin from the injection they took. From 11 o'clock until morning, we want to see a blood sugar that holds relatively steady. If it goes up or down by more than, say, 30 points or 2 millimole, there's probably something wrong with that basal insulin dose. And it may take a couple of attempts to see what happens, but if you have a pattern of rising or falling glucose overnight, then that dose of long-acting insulin should be changed, because an incorrect dose is going to muck things up the rest of the day. It's going
Sure.
to cause blood sugars to rise or fall between meals, and you're never going to be steady. It makes it really
Mm-hmm.
hard to manage glucose levels at any time of day.
Just think that the MDI or the multiple daily injection use of a basal insulin is also, we test the overnight, but we don't really test through the course of the day. And that's where some of it gets a little bit hard to manipulate, and a pump can be a better option, because if you've tested your overnight in basal only injected insulin and that's looking perfectly fine, but then let's say you skip a meal in the middle of the day and your blood sugar is consistently dropping and there's no insulin on board from any rapid acting dose, in general, that's a good indication that your basal it's working too heavy for you at a particular time, but there's not much you can do about it.
That's right. That's right. You're out of luck because you need the dose to hold you steady overnight. And most people require more basal at night than they do during the middle of the day. So the dose that holds you steady overnight, you will likely be on a gradual decline during the day if you're fasting. So it's important to eat your meals and snacks on schedule, or you can wind up hypoglycemic. With
Right.
pumps, we can vary the basal dose by time of day. So it makes eating optional, makes scheduling optional. You can vary your schedule pretty much as you like. And the pump also lets us set temporary adjustments to the basal insulin. That's not something we can easily do on injections. So
No.
once you take a shot of long-acting insulin, you're
It's there.
stuck for the next 24 to 36 hours. It ain't going to change.
Right.
On a pump, since we're using rapid acting insulin to make the basal, and it delivers every few minutes in tiny pulses. So if we change the rate of delivery at 2 o'clock, we're going to start seeing changes within the hour to the level of basal that's actually working in the bloodstream.
Right. I mean, the value of a pump, especially these days where people are just much more busy and have much more variation to their day-to-day schedule. One day in the office, another day working from home, one day, walking to the train 2 miles and the next day taking a car. It can definitely create some variance that basal that's injected, it may not work very well for, and you may then consider, well, I don't love being connected to something, but I sure do like having the ability to have more flexibility that my life needs. So,
Sure. I mean, there are a lot of people who prefer to be on injections for a variety of reasons.
sure.
And for them, we can still find creative ways to make things work. We can use extra food at times when the blood sugar would be falling otherwise. We can use rapid acting bolus insulin at a time when the blood sugar would be climbing. So it's still doable. It's just not as easy to make it happen being on injections compared to being on a.
True. Yeah. So basal insulin, foundation, understand how to use it, get your dose right, and then move on, right?
Yeah, well, there are still some short-term changes that may need to be made, particularly with kids that are growing. The basal needs are going to climb until they hit they've completed their puberty years
Mm-hmm.
during pregnancy. And you work a lot with pregnancy patients yourself. We see the needs change through the course of the pregnancy. And,
Right.
as we age or as our changes in our lifestyles, the doses can change. There's
Yeah.
also, day-to-day things like you described, where the basal insulin dose, especially when we're using a pump, needs to be adjusted temporarily. We have these features in pumps called temporary basal rates that allow us to raise or lower the basal on a short-term basis.
Mm-hmm.
For example, if you're going to be out working in the yard in the afternoon, you're going to need a lot less basal. Even with an automated delivery system, you often need to tell the system, hey, cut back. I need to eat a lot less than usual. If you're going to be doing just the opposite and vegging out all day, I find when I'm sitting in meetings all day, my sugars climb.
Yeah.
But the same thing happens on Sundays when I'm watching football games back to back and just planted on the sofa. Sugars climb. Long car trips, sugars climb.
Mm-hmm.
So I can bump up my basal delivery during times like
Right.
during illness. It's necessary usually to get extra basal insulin to keep the glucose from continuously rising.
Mm-hmm.
Under stress, same thing. We need extra basal insulin. Any
Yep.
situations where you make temporary adjustments to your basal?
Well, but yes, absolutely. Conference coming up that I will be sedentary for fair portions of it. And despite the walking between the different, events and whatever, I often find that the sedentary portion of it really does create a need for more insulin. Similar illness, especially when it's an illness that isn't just like a cold that I'm just navigating day to day. It is what it is. That doesn't usually affect my blood sugar too much in terms of more insulin, but fever, really considerable like congestion and just feeling nasty and really run down, anywhere between 20 to 40% more insulin. And then illnesses, I've never personally used them, but steroids. Steroids are a huge blow to insulin need. They definitely bump your insulin need up pretty considerably, and basal insulin absolutely needs a big jump. So
It's funny you mentioned the conference. 4 or 5 days at a conference, you're going to be raising your basal
yes,
a little bit, where I'm going to be lowering it. I'm in meetings and I'm going back and forth between the exhibit hall, the meeting rooms,
Mhm.
the scientific session rooms where the presentations are being given. And I average about 17,000 steps a day at these conferences. And I'm normally sitting all day. So my basal is set based on a day where I'm sitting. When
Sure.
I'm walking 16,000 steps, I'm constantly dropping. So I have to lower my delivery all
Yeah.
day long to keep myself from going low. So individuals' differences
They
are,
vary.
that's key.
Definitely. Travel, I definitely need more depending on how long the travel is. I
Mhm.
find that if I'm going to be sedentary, usually for more than about 90 minutes, I typically need a little bit more insulin, not a lot, but just enough to keep me stable at the targets that I've got set for my system.
Absolutely. Now, pump users, there's a whole other set of basal testing that goes into fine tuning the settings. If you're on injections, we're really just looking at the overnight to dial the dose in. But on a
Right.
pump, we're going to want to test every phase of the day and get the basal adjusted accordingly. Most, but not all people require less basal in the middle of the day and more basal during the night or early
Mhm.
morning hours. Everyone's unique. And the degree of the peaks and valleys to the basal vary from person to person, and just the magnitude of the basal they require. And most people require 40 to 50% of their insulin as basal, but even that can vary a lot from person to person.
Right.
So we walk all of our patients through basal testing at each phase of the day when they're on a pump to get all of the settings dialed in correctly, and find that once that happens, everything falls into place really nicely. Things
Mhm.
start to make more sense. We get more predictability in the results from the boluses than we did before. So getting those basals set correctly is important. Even for people on automated systems, even though the systems will self-adjust the delivery of the basal based on the situation, I find they get better results if the baseline settings are good, because then they're not having to fix rises and falls as often.
Correct.
The algorithm has a lot less work that it has to do and things are generally more stable. Plus,
Mhm.
even people on automated systems are sometimes out of the closed loop mode,
Right.
and it reverts to manual delivery. And if your program settings are right, you won't miss a beat. If they're not correct for you, your
And
glucose
many of the
control will
reasons that you
suffer.
might actually be stepping out of automation could be settings where you are sick and you need so much more insulin than an automated system is not, especially the adaptive automated systems. They're not going to really know to give you that much more in this particular moment. So if your baseline is set right, you have that as a stepping stone to saying, okay, I'm sick. I need 30% more insulin. But gosh, if that basal in manual mode isn't right, you're guessing in the dark how much more insulin you need to add.
Yeah, yeah. So having the correct basal settings when you use a pump is important for everybody, not
Mhm.
just those on manual systems, but also those on automated systems.
Yeah, absolutely. So basal insulin dosing, all important. Know how to test it, know how to adjust it, when to adjust it, why to use the different kind of smarter pieces if you are using an insulin pump. Learning all of that about basal dosing is certainly very valuable and important. So
Yeah.
again, questions, we are here. Got a skilled team of clinicians that can absolutely help to make sure. Obviously, you've got a whole bunch of wonderful information in the chapter in your book all about basal insulin dosing and evaluation, along with some nice information about kind of where you are in life and where you could potentially fall with your dosing needs. So if you haven't checked out the book, check out Think Like a Pancreas, the book, and then check in with us as we move through each of the chapters. And we look forward to your listening again. So thanks for joining again, Gary.
Thanks, Jenny.
Thanks for tuning in to Think Like a Pancreas, the podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to like, follow, or subscribe on your favorite podcast app. On behalf of Think Like a Pancreas, the podcast, I'm Gary Scheiner, wishing you a fantastic week ahead. And don't forget to think like a pancreas.